Loneliness, a word that echoes like an empty room. For many it means pain, emptiness, the feeling of being cut off from the world. But for Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, loneliness was not simply a problem to be solved. He saw it as a threshold, not just a deficit, but an invitation. Loneliness to Jung was not merely the absence of others, but the presence of something deeper waiting to emerge. Before we explore Jung's unique approaches, we need to recognize a simple truth. Loneliness is universal. Everyone knows it. Sitting in a crowded room, yet feeling invisible, speaking with others but sensing no real connection, or that late-night moment when silence surrounds you and a wave of inner estrangement floods your mind. Society tells us loneliness is a weakness, a flaw, something to escape at all costs. But Jung saw it differently. He understood that loneliness does not always mean that someone else is missing. More often, it means that a part of you is missing. That is the crucial insight. We fear loneliness because we believe it signals isolation. But Jung would say, it is not isolation. It is a call inward. In his clinical work, Jung noticed again and again how people lived driven by an inner fragmentation. They sought recognition, relationships, distractions, but deep down they avoided confronting their own true selves. Loneliness, he believed, is the moment when the unconscious rises to the surface. When the outer world grows quiet, the inner voices we've long ignored begin to speak, suppressed desires, unspoken fears, forgotten longings. Instead of repressing loneliness or numbing it with noise and distraction, Jung suggested listening to it, because loneliness carries a message. He often reminded his patients, we are not only social beings, we are also profoundly individual beings, and the individual self demands to be heard. This is the first lesson. Loneliness is not simply an empty hole to be filled. It is a mirror. It forces you to face yourself, even if you're afraid to look. Most people run from that mirror. They scroll endlessly on their phones, jump into shallow relationships, or bury themselves in work. Anything to avoid being alone with themselves. But Jung would say, that is precisely where the real journey begins. Because only in solitude can the unconscious reach us. And if we are brave enough to listen, loneliness transforms from a weight into a threshold. It becomes a door that leads us toward our deeper self. Think about it. Maybe you felt that strange emptiness, even when surrounded by others. That subtle ache that no conversation seems to soothe. Jung would say, don't immediately escape. Sit with it, pay attention. Behind the silence lies not nothingness, but a hidden realm that belongs only to you. And this is what makes Jung's perspective so unique. While much of modern culture frames loneliness as a disease to be cured, he saw it as an initiation, an invitation to encounter yourself, not as an abstract idea, but as a living reality. That is where our journey begins, loneliness as mirror, as threshold, as the voice of the unconscious. In the next part, we'll explore how Jung connected loneliness with archetypes and the shadow, and why this experience is not just personal, but part of an ancient human journey toward transformation. Carl Jung never saw loneliness as a mere accident or a flaw in human nature. For him, loneliness was the outer expression of a much deeper inner process. It was not simply about being cut off from others, but about being drawn into a stage of what he called individuation, the path by which a person becomes whole, unique, and truly themselves. And on this path, loneliness plays a crucial role. Jung believed that in moments of solitude, something archetypal stirs within us. Archetypes are universal images and patterns living in the collective unconscious, shared across all humanity. They appear in myths, dreams, religions, and stories across cultures. When you feel lonely, you are not just experiencing your own personal circumstances. You are also stepping into an ancient image, the wanderer, the outcast, the hero setting out on a journey. Think of mythic tales. The hero leaves the village, ventures into the wilderness, faces trials alone. The loneliness he feels is not random. It is part of the transformation. Jung would say that each of us, in our own way, walks this path. Loneliness is not only emptiness, it is an archetypal doorway to change. One of the central encounters on this path is with what Jung called the shadow. The shadow contains everything about ourselves we don't want to see. Repressed desires, unacknowledged weaknesses, forgotten wounds. In daily life, we often cover these parts up with busyness, roles, or social distractions. But in loneliness, The distractions fall away. Suddenly the shadow surfaces. Shadow. This is why loneliness can feel so unbearable. It is not just the absence of company, it is the presence of everything we've tried to push away. Old regrets, unfulfilled longings, shame, jealousy, pain we thought we had buried. Jung insisted, the shadow is not evil, it is a part of you, and the moment you acknowledge it, you take the first step toward wholeness. Society teaches us, don't linger in loneliness. Distract yourself. Fill the void with entertainment, noise, or company. But Jung disagreed. He understood that only those willing to face the shadow can uncover the hidden meaning of solitude. Imagine this. You constantly feel lonely, even in relationships. Jung might say, your unconscious is calling you. Perhaps you've silenced creative impulses that want expression. Perhaps you've hidden away the authentic parts of yourself in order to fit in. Loneliness, then, is the signal that these parts are knocking on the door, asking to be integrated. From an archetypal perspective, you are like the wanderer stepping into the unknown, not to be lost forever, but to discover your real home within. Loneliness is the threshold where the inner journey begins, and the shadow stands waiting. And here lies the paradox. By confronting your shadow in solitude, you do not become smaller or weaker. You become larger, more complete. You realize, I am more than I thought I was. Loneliness becomes not a punishment, but an initiation rite, preparing you to live more authentically. For Jung, loneliness was never just destructive. It was necessary. Without solitude and the courage to meet the shadow, a person remains shallow, trapped in borrowed roles, and dependent on others' approval. But those who dare to enter their solitude shed those masks and begin to discover their true face. This is the second great lesson. Loneliness is not just a personal struggle. It is an archetypal process. It is the unconscious calling you, insisting that you face your shadow. And when you accept this call, what once felt like suffering can transform into a path of growth. In the next part, we will explore how Jung saw symbols and dreams as the inner language of loneliness, and how paying attention to them can turn isolation into a dialogue with the deepest parts of yourself. When we are lonely, something strange begins to happen. The outer world grows quiet, and the inner world begins to speak. Carl Jung noticed that it is often in times of solitude that dreams become more vivid, symbols grow stronger, and the unconscious makes itself felt with unusual intensity. For Jung, this was not an accident. It was an inner necessity. Because when there are no people to distract us, no endless chatter or constant movement, the psyche turns inward. And inside, the unconscious does not speak in rational arguments or neat explanations. It speaks in images, dreams, visions, symbols. These are the language of the soul. Loneliness, then, is not silence at all. It is full of voices. We simply need to learn how to listen. Jung called this the symbolic language of the psyche. These are not random fantasies, they are messages. If, during a lonely phase, someone dreams of standing before a locked house, Jung would interpret that not as meaningless nonsense, but as a metaphor. The person has not yet entered their own inner home. If they dream of endless roads, perhaps it is the soul's way of expressing a longing for direction. Most people dismiss such images, but Jung insisted, they matter. They are signposts. Especially in times of loneliness, they act like glowing markers guiding us through the darkness. This is where his concepts of anima and animus come in. Jung believed that every man carries an inner image of the feminine, the anima, and every woman carries an inner image of the masculine, the animus. In solitude, these inner figures often rise to the surface. People dream of mysterious women, wise men, unknown companions. Jung saw these not as random characters, but as aspects of the soul seeking to guide us. Imagine someone who feels deeply abandoned and dreams of a stranger leading them through a labyrinth. Jung would interpret this as the anima or animus offering guidance in a moment of despair. To engage with these figures is to realize that you are not entirely alone. Your unconscious itself becomes your companion. Symbols also emerge spontaneously. Many people in lonely phases repeatedly draw or imagine the same shapes: circles, spirals, mandalas. Jung recognized these as archetypes of the self. They symbolize wholeness, order, healing. Through them, the unconscious whispers, even if you feel torn apart, there is a center within you that is intact. Loneliness, then, is not just an empty room. It is a temple where these symbols reveal themselves. But, and this is crucial, you must be willing to notice them. Ignore them, and solitude remains a fog. Attend to them, and they can become a compass. Jung encouraged his patients to write down their dreams, to draw their symbols, to observe inner images without rushing to explain them away. He believed they function like seeds. You may not understand them at first, but with time their meaning unfolds. Often, they show you exactly what you are missing in your everyday life. One striking case: a woman Jung treated suffered from long periods of loneliness. In her dreams and drawings, a mandala appeared again and again. Jung guided her to work with this image, to paint it, to reflect on it. Gradually, she began to feel less fragmented, more centered. Her loneliness did not vanish, but it no longer felt empty. It became filled with meaning. This is Jung's third lesson: loneliness speaks. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in images. If you have the courage to listen, what felt like a void becomes a dialogue. You are not abandoned. You are on an inner journey, accompanied by the very figures and symbols that rise from the depths of your psyche. In the next part, we will explore how Jung connected loneliness with individuation and why the ability to be alone is, paradoxically, the very foundation of real connection with others. Carl Jung often said, "Those who cannot stand to be alone will never truly be able to be with others." At first, that sounds like a paradox, even a provocation. But when we look closer, we see the deep truth behind it. Most people do not seek company out of freedom, but out of fear. They fear silence. They fear the emptiness of being by themselves. So they rush into relationships, friendships, distractions. But these connections are often shallow because they are born not from strength but from escape. In his practice, Jung repeatedly saw how people who could not bear solitude ended up entangled in dependency. They searched for in others what they could not find in themselves. The result? Relationships filled with demands, expectations, disappointments. Instead of genuine encounter, there is a transaction. Give me what I lack. But no one can ever fill that inner void. And so the cycle repeats: closeness, disappointment, emptiness. Jung offered a radically different vision: the process of individuation. By this he meant the journey of becoming whole, of integrating the many parts of oneself into a unique, authentic self. And loneliness, far from being an obstacle, was central to this process. Because only in solitude, when the voices of others fade, can you finally hear your own. Loneliness is like a laboratory. It forces you to discover your own resources. In those quiet hours, you begin to notice what truly matters to you. You may discover creative impulses you had suppressed, values that are yours alone, or masks you had worn simply to belong. Jung would say, these realizations are the building blocks of your true self. And here is the turning point. Once you learn to be with yourself, you no longer need others as an escape. You approach them freely. You don't demand that they fill your emptiness. Instead, you share your fullness. Dependence becomes relationship. Fear becomes genuine intimacy. Jung called this the paradoxical truth. Only those who can be alone can truly be with others, because they no longer seek what they do not have. They bring something into the relationship instead of taking, and the difference is enormous. Picture two people. The first is terrified of loneliness and jumps into relationships at the first chance. He constantly seeks validation, attention, reassurance. Because he is insecure within, he is easily disappointed and clings all the harder. The second has learned to live with solitude. She knows her silence, her shadow, her inner images. When she enters into connection, it is not out of lack, but out of choice. She is free, and others feel that freedom. Jung saw this as the secret of authentic connection, because only a person who has faced themselves can truly see another. Not as a projection, not as a mirror, but as they are. This is the fourth great lesson. Loneliness is not a defect, it is preparation. It does not make you antisocial. It makes you capable of real intimacy. It transforms dependency into freedom, superficiality into depth. So if you are experiencing loneliness, ask yourself, is this really only a deficiency? Or is it an opportunity to discover the resources of your own self? The answer you find there will determine not only how you relate to yourself, but also how you relate to others. In the final part, we will see how Jung understood the transformation of loneliness, not simply enduring it, but integrating it, turning solitude into a source of creativity, meaning, and even spiritual depth. We have seen how Jung understood loneliness as a mirror, a threshold, a confrontation with the shadow, a dialogue through symbols, and a path toward individuation. All of this leads to a final and profound insight. Loneliness can be transformed. It does not have to remain a burden. it can become a source, not emptiness but fullness. Jung believed that once loneliness is embraced, it releases an extraordinary creative energy. Why? Because in solitude, space opens up. A silence emerges in which new ideas, images, and impulses can rise to the surface. Many of Jung's patients reported that their deepest creative breakthroughs happened during their loneliest times. They began to paint, to write, to compose, to explore talents they had never dared to express. For Jung, this was not coincidence. It was the self speaking at last, finally given room to manifest. This is the gift of solitude. It is fertile ground. If you stop fighting it, loneliness becomes a wellspring of creativity. Perhaps you discover art, music, writing. Perhaps you find new ways of expressing yourself. Each act of creation is not only a work for the world, but also a healing for your own psyche. What was once a vague ache inside becomes form, color, sound, and in that expression, something within you becomes whole. But Jung went further. He believed that loneliness has a spiritual dimension. Those who can bear the silence often report contact with something greater, a sense of connection with the collective unconscious, with the divine, or with a meaning that transcends the individual self. Loneliness, when embraced, becomes a doorway. Through it, we may encounter a depth that is not available in the noise of constant company. This does not mean that loneliness disappears. It remains, but its quality changes. It is no longer feared, but respected. It is no longer an enemy, but a teacher. Integrating loneliness into daily life then means two things. First, it means intentionally creating spaces of solitude, not as punishment, but as practice. Second, it means honoring the symbols, dreams, and creative impulses that arise in those spaces. Write down your dreams. Paint the images that appear to you. Set aside time without distractions. Use meditation, prayer, or simple walks in silence to connect with your inner center. Jung would insist, loneliness is not the opposite of connection. It is its foundation. Only those who have learned to sit with themselves can connect with others in truth, because they are not using others as a distraction. They are meeting them as whole beings. Perhaps you feel the weight of loneliness right now. Perhaps you are desperately searching for a way out. But Jung would invite you to pause, to stop running, to ask, what is this loneliness trying to tell me? What message is hiding behind the silence? His answer was always the same. Behind the pain lies an invitation, the call to become yourself. This is the fifth and final lesson. Loneliness is not a void that must be filled. It is a spring that can nourish you if you have the courage to drink from it. It is a room where the self speaks, a place where creativity, meaning, and spiritual depth are born. And so the circle closes. What we fear most can become our greatest teacher. What we avoid most can become our greatest treasure. Jung showed us that navigating loneliness does not mean escaping it, but transforming it. And in that transformation lies its true power.